Guys, good evening, good evening. Sure I got my volumes all good here. All right. So hope everybody had a good week. This will be our second week with the chassis discussion, chassis dynamics. For you guys, well, before we get into that, let's give everybody a couple minutes here to get in. So this week, finished up on Rihanna 2.0, got all the wiring finished up, and we got it running. I think I told you guys last week we got it running. And it's all good, getting close to getting ready for track testing. And so over at, hey John, good evening. Was over at Scott's working on his Vega, trying to get him ready to go to Raleigh Good Guys show next week. So if anybody's in the North Carolina area and you go to the Good Guys show, make sure you check out Scott and his cream-colored Camelback. It's a car I drove to Good Guys in Columbus, Ohio last year. I had to change the bell housing. The bell housing center bore was out of square with the crankshaft and was messing up the synchros in the transmission. So we changed the bell and put adjustable dowel pins in the block and re-indexed it and putting it back together now. So that'll be, I know for sure next week's show I will be able to tell you for sure he's good to go. We still got to put the transmission in. I got a ram throwout bearing, and of course it was wrong one, so I got the new one coming tomorrow. So we put that thing together. And trying to get the shop organized so I can get back on Dave's wiring job and on Mike's Trans Am, get the Dakota digital gauges in, get that thing done. So we're working on that for the rest of this week. I think one day this week I got some chassis inspections to do for IHRA. So we'll see how that all goes. And move on to the next week. I will be update on the 4200. I will be going to Leo's this weekend, get the computer back in and get some analog tuning done so that we can be prepared for the 28th at Bradenton for the next run day Sunday. Hopefully we'll be able to make some full passes this week or that weekend and actually see where we're at with that thing. Baby steps. Everything's baby steps. We want to see that record number right now, but obviously it takes time. So we'll be patient and we'll go through everything, cross our T's, dot our I's, and make sure everything's good on that thing. Knock on wood, the motor I did is still standing in strong, so that's a good thing. So I guess we can start our discussion with this chassis setup stuff. So last week I kind of went over basic front end alignment and some of the things that you can look for. How much caster and camber you should run, how to check camber, tire temperatures to assist in camber tuning. And I think that was a pretty well received live show. If you guys that didn't get to see it, you can always catch it on the channel on replay. But today we're going to stay with the front end suspension, but we're going to slowly work our way to the total vehicle dynamic. So I guess we should go ahead and get to it. So let me switch screens here. Make sure our volume stay okay. Our volume stayed good. So the whole thing with chassis dynamics. Hey Ryan, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the show. Um, so here's my old car, and this is the reason why we want to do a study on chassis dynamics. Here's a pretty high CG car with all kinds of inner wound suspension, like any of us build on our hot rods. This car actually had a C5 suspension on the front with a aftermarket subframe that actually attached to the original chassis, and then in the back had a 9-inch straight axle with NASCAR truck arms, panhard bar, and coilovers all around. So we'll go ahead and look at some of this stuff this week, or this show, on what we ran into on this particular project. If you notice, depending on whether you're watching this on your computer or TV or your phone, remember last week I was talking about putting why we have positive camber, and this is a prime example. You can see the car has got a bit of body roll, not a ton. I mean, it have an inch and a half front NI roll bar and a 3/4 inch rear NI roll bar. One of the issues with this was that the roll centers weren't correct, but you can see that even with almost 2 degrees of camber, this tire almost looks like it's in a positive camber position. And you can see on the other side, on the tire on the inside of the turn, you can almost see that the contact patch wasn't even completely on the ground. So these are the reasons why you want to look at roll centers and alignments. But the alignment is like the end thing, or if you're just wanting a street car or something like that, that's something you want to do for your tire wear and stuff like that. But when you actually get into dynamics, now you have to get into roll centers and Ackerman and bump steer. So those are all important things, more so when you're designing a front suspension or you're changing a front suspension on your car. This is something that has to, you want to address this before you finish the car, because if there's any structural changes, you want to do that beforehand. And that was one of the issues with this vehicle. I talked to the manufacturer that made the subframe multiple times, and they refused to give me any of the roll center information, whatever ride height that they specified, although they did give you a coilover length. So it was funny that they couldn't give me a ride height, but yet they knew what coilover fit in the front end. So on the third time I talked with the people, they told me, well, if we told you all that information, you'd just build it yourself. Well, I told them if I was going to do that, I would buy it, copy it, and do it anyway. So, I wanted to know the roll center because I was not wanting to know whether I was throwing my money away or not. At the end of the day, I really wanted the Corvette suspension because the original suspension on the car had a lot of very bad geometry. And so I decided to roll the dice, purchase it, and then after I did the roll centers, I knew I needed to change it, but I never got back to it. Unfortunately, that's usually the situation when you're doing a lot of work on friends and cars like that. Yeah, you're right, Ryan, or they didn't know. And I kind of think that's what the real thing was. They had no idea what I was talking about. But that, I knew it was bad and I needed to change it, but I just never got back to it. And I had fun with driving the car anyway. I did win some autocross events throughout the time I owned the car, but it could have been much better had I had some time to invest and fix it. But at that point, I knew that with the high CG of the car, no matter how good I made it, it still was going to be mediocre at best compared to the cars that I was running against. Your 60s and 70s cars, even 80s, depending on what the brake is in the sanctioning body, those cars have much better CG numbers than the 50s cars do. And I wasn't gonna channel the car or do anything like that, so I just kind of lived with it and enjoyed driving it, and it still drove great. But so there's the front suspension of the car, and obviously you can see that the lower control arms were going uphill. And as Ryan said, they probably didn't know, because as I said at the beginning, they told me what coilover shock to put in there. And with that coilover, and I believe I had 700-pound springs in there, you can see that I was up on the threaded perch pretty decent. So it just wasn't a very good design. To put the car where I wanted it for ride height, the shock was almost bottomed out. And if I ran it up to where the control arms were level, I was almost topped out on the shock, because on a 12-inch shock you have very little travel. Hey John, yeah, 67 GTO would have a much better CG than this thing had, but it was a fun car. So anyway, so this is what we're gonna go through and discuss today is the different principles that go into the front geometry, and then we'll move on and then further next episodes on other things. So one of the things you always want to check when you're doing any kind of suspension change, even on a factory car, the OE manufacturers don't really care about bump steer. And what bump steer is it's a toe change as the suspension is going through its geometry. So this is one type of tool that you can check it, and you have to take the spring out of the car, and then you can use a floor jack to move the suspension up and down. That's kind of what that style gauge looks like. But you can do it on different ways. When I do drag cars, obviously drag cars we don't care about compression. We're only worried about extension, because that's what the car does leaving the starting line. So what I will do there is I just use my toe plates, and I'll have the car at rest, set my toe, then I'll jack the front end up till the front end hits the travel limiter, and then recheck the toe at that point, and then make adjustments. So this is looking at the front suspension. These 2 points are where the upper and lower mount to the chassis, and the outer ones are your ball joints. And you can see you want an instant center. That's part of your roll center, but the instant center is the alignment of those arms, and you kind of want everything to be in alignment like that. You don't want the upper A arm at a steeper angle. Then you put your tie rod in, and this is the easiest way to have no bump steer, is that all these pivot points on the chassis side, so you have your chassis upper A arm mount, your chassis lower A arm mount, and then your inner tie rod are all in line, same as the outside. You have your upper ball joint, lower ball joint, and your tie rod linked to the spindle. When you have everything in line like that, you will have zero bump steer. But that's not how it all works out typically. So what we have to do on a car that you can't get all that stuff, because we're going to talk about Ackerman in a second. So here's a prime example. In this picture, here's your ball joint. Your strut mount would be up here. So here's your line, but here's your outer tie rod, because you have to have Ackerman to have minimize scrub radius or tire scrub. So what you can do is they make two different kind of kits. You can get one that's got a taper, it goes into the spindle, and then you can put shims down here with a spherical bearing or Heim joint, whatever you want to call it, and then you can adjust it up and down till you get your bump steer to a minimum. There's that kind with the taper. And now another one that you can do, which I would do a lot of times instead of buying a kit like that, is I would just use the outer heim joint, spherical bearing, whatever you want to call it. I would drill the spindle out with a 5/8 drill bit, and then just put a 5/8 bolt in, and then use your shims and everything appropriately, and you don't have to buy this a bolt. And that gives you a little bit more travel adjustment too, because this has a good 1/4 of an inch from the taper. So if you need to go higher, you really have a issue there. And that's just showing you, again, a near zero bump steer. And as the rod gets longer and moves the angles, it just changes your bump. So that may be my last slide for that. So let's go here. So anyway, so what you want to do is, like I said, is you want to measure your toe. If it's a autocross, road course, stock car, anything that's going to have braking and acceleration, you really need to remove the springs and then use a jack of some sort to move the chassis up and down, checking your toe. Again, with the drag car, you only have to worry about it going up. And then you use the shims to make it as minimum as you can get it. I see a lot of cars come in for drag alignment, and we'll have the front suspension pulled down so it has maybe only 2 to 3 inches of travel. And I've seen cars that have 2 inches of bump. So you have your total toe at rest set at an 1/8 inch toed in, and then you jack the car up till it hits the limiter. So that's where it's going to basically be going down the track. And I've seen, depending on the angles of the tie rods, I've seen them either toe in or toe out up to 2 inches. So you can imagine there's a lot of scrub there. And I meant to put a picture in there. Prime picture is an old stocker or super stocker NHRA Camaro Firebird, the A bodies, or B bodies. Typical, those cars had a ton of bump steer in them, and you'd see the cars leave the starting line, the wheels will be in the air, and they're pointing towards the center of the car. And when they come down, whichever tire hits first will make the car dart to one direction. So that's why you want to minimize that. Same as in a road course car or autocross or whatever, when you go over an obstacle on the course and one wheel goes up and down, you don't want the tire to change direction, especially if it's in the middle of a turn or something. It could unsettle the car, especially when you're on the edge of traction. As you you don't want to have a toe adjustment and lose control of the car. See, Bill's in. Hey, Bill, how you doing? So that basically is bump steer. It's basically making sure that the toe stays good at whatever chassis height the car is at, wherever the wheel height is. If it's going over bumps, that's why it's called bump steer, and stuff like that. And then the other thing that is important, I'm sorry, I didn't get Ackerman in there. Ackerman was supposed to be next. Let me see what I did here. Sorry about that, guys. Let me change screens here. Where's my mouse? There it is. All right, why won't it go to the next screen? All right, it's worked earlier. Sorry, I apologize about this. Why is that? None of this is working. Let me switch this to this other screen here. right, so little technical difficulties. I see Chris is there. Hey, Chris. Okay. So, sorry. So after bump steer is one of your chassis things that you want to have straight. The other thing is Ackerman. And Ackerman kind of throws into that bump steer equation because if the outer tie rod may not be in the perfect alignment because of you have to also allow for Ackerman. And what the Ackerman principle basically is that to make the car free in the turn, the inner tire has to be turned farther than the outer tire so that they can follow the same arc because around this center, which is the center, turn center. Now, obviously, you wouldn't know what those are, but there are ways of figuring this out. See if this is going to work. Okay. Let me open this up here. So, a quick rule of thumb without having to be an engineer, or maybe you stayed at a Holiday Inn, but nevertheless, an easy way to figure out Ackerman is the intersection of the bottom ball joint and the tie rod to the center of the rear of the chassis. So this is you can get heavy into trigonometry and stuff like that to figure this stuff out. There's formulas if you are interested that you can Google on the internet, but this is usually get you in a pretty good spot. So when you have a rear steer car, your tie rod should be in line with the ball joint and in line with the differential rear center. So you could take a laser from the differential, shoot it at the lower ball joint, and your rear steer tie rod should be pretty close to in alignment with that. If it is, then chances are the Ackerman will be good on the car. And then on a front steer car, it's the other way around. The tie rod still needs to be in line with the ball joint, but that is now going to be wider than the ball joint because it's farther away from the rear differential. So those are quick, easy ways without having to be an engineer on how to figure out what your Ackerman is. Now, the other thing with the length of your spindles will also affect your steering angle. So to get a quicker reacting steering, if you pull the tie rods closer to the ball joint, it's going to make the steering quicker. And if they're farther away from the ball joint, it's going to make the steering slower. So typically, think of it this way, like a rack and pinion or a gearbox is going to move the suspension 1.5 inches in each direction, or 2 inches, or whatever it may be. So if you have and I don't know how to do this math, but if you move your tie rod, say your tie rod's 3 inches from your ball joint, and the steering's moving 3 inches in the left and 3 inches to the right, well, that tie rod's going to move 6 inches total. So that'll put the wheel at, let's just say, 20 degrees in either direction from center. If you move that tie rod closer to the ball joint, it's still going to travel the same distance, but now the wheel is going to turn at a steeper angle, so probably 25 degrees in both directions. This is how, if you guys have ever watched a drift car, it looks like the tires actually turn sideways because they will pull the inner tie rod almost to the spindle. So now when you get that 3 inches travel left, 3 inches travel right, that makes the wheel turn almost 90 degrees. And that's how they can control the car when it's in such a power slide with the steering. Normally you wouldn't have that much steering angle and you would be behind on the steering and the car would come around. But they can get farther around with the wheel to keep the suspension aligned. Okay, so now it doesn't look like the next picture is going to show. So let me see if I can pull up the next picture. So this is one of the things I did on my Chevy, because now again, this was a hodgepodge front end. It was somebody's subframe kit with the C5 suspension. Now, to get the car lower, you can see I put an LG billet spindle on there, which was a drop spindle. But the problem was the steering rack that they put in the car was like a 19-to-1 ratio. So from lock to lock, it was like 6 turns on the steering wheel. And of course, autocross, that was a handful, having to go hand over hand to get from lock to lock, to go through a series of quick changes. So I needed to quicken the steering, and that's how I did. I put a new hole in the spindle, moved the tie rod back an inch, and that quickened the steering up considerably. Wasn't as quick as I'd liked it to been, but it did make it quicker, and I was able to keep up in tight turns from hard left to hard right to hard left. And so those are things that, if you're designing your own front suspension, or you're putting kits together, these are things that you can check before you actually drive the car and see how it's going to be. You can put an angle finder on the wheel, turn it, and drop 2 plumb bobs off the rotors, and then you can see how far of an arc you get and how far the wheel is going to turn. So that's basically the gist of bump steer and Ackerman. You can see here's the ball joint on the Corvette spindle, and you can see that that's in quite a ways from the rotor, and then you can see here the tie rod is very close to the rotor. So that's again showing your Ackerman. You can shoot that with a laser beam, and like I said, center of the rear diff to the ball joint, it should hit the tie rod. Then you have Ackerman's good. John says, I've been hearing a lot that drop spindles are terrible for drag racing weight transfer. That all depends on the vehicle that you're using it on. So we're going to get into that in a couple, I don't know, maybe the next episode or in 2 weeks. But basically, it depends on the application. If you're trying to get, and that it really doesn't even make much sense to say that, because just because you drop the spindle, all you're doing is you're changing the ride height of the car. And a good thing about drop spindles, like where I was using it here, to get my car where I was as low as I wanted. Let me go back to that picture. So on this car, you could see that this is when I first put it on. There's no anti-roll bar or anything on it at the time. And to get the car near ride height where I wanted it, the lower A-arms were going uphill pretty dramatically. So actually, in this picture, I've actually raised the car up a little bit. So rather than taking the subframe out and having to rebuild the subframe, make a fixture, all the things that needed to be done, my quick out was to put drop spindles on, because now the drop spindle is going to move all the ball joints and the tie rods. On this spindle was a 1-inch drop, so it moved everything down 1 inch. So after that was done, that put my A-arm closer to level. So that was a good thing for corner weight transfer. For drag racing, your weight transfer is all going to be dependent on your rear suspension and the travel limit that you have on the front end. So again, using a drop spindle to get the car super low to the ground, there's nothing wrong with that, because you're keeping your A-arm geometry correct and keeping your tie rods flat, which are going to help. That's all going to help in your bump steer. Bump steer is way more important than weight transfer, because like I said before, with a super stock or something, if you have heavy bump steer and the car comes down off a wheelie and it touches down on one tire, which it's always going to do because the motor's torquing and the left front is always going to be higher than the right front. Even if you have a super big anti-roll bar in the back, it's always going to be the right tire is going to touch down first. And if that tire is turned to the center of the track or to the outside of the track because of bump steer, that's going to be super negative in the car going down the track, and you may cause the car to crash. So you don't want that. So there's no penalty for having drop spindle for that. And then as far as weight transfer to the back of the car, again, that depends on a couple things. One, the rear suspension that you're using, your IC of your rear suspension, which we're going to talk about that in a couple shows, and what the how much droop you have in the front end, and how tight you have your shocks. So no matter where the spindle height is on the car, if your rebound is soft, the front end is going to come up. It doesn't matter where the spindle height is. It's coming up. Same thing with your travel limiters. If you have the front end tied down to 1.5 inches of travel, that is what's going to hinder weight transfer, not the drop spindle. And a lot of cars that don't run wheelie bars will tie the front ends down really tight, because when the suspension is moving in the front, it's easy for the car to continue to climb the ring gear and make it wheelie. When you tie the front end down, now it's like a clean jerk. When the car picks up the suspension, as soon as the suspension stops, it's not easy anymore. Now it's got to pick up the additional 150, 200 pounds that the suspension is adding. So it definitely changes the way the car reacts. Ryan says, could you adjust the IC for drop spindles? Absolutely, absolutely. That we're going to get into roll centers here in a minute, and your IC, your roll center IC, and your IC front to back is all adjustable. And well, let me say, on a car that has adjustments, it's adjustable. So but it is, you can make it adjustable. You may have to, depending on your car, you may have to move components. With the IC on the front of my car, the frame-mounted lower ball joints, lower control arm mounts to the frame needed to be raised 1 inch. So, and I'll show you that in a minute. There's a program that'll show you all that stuff, and you can really fine-tune on all that. So, all right, so let's go back to where we were. Hopefully, John, that kind of answers your question. Okay, we'll get out of there. So we talked about the bump steer and the Ackerman. So now we can discuss roll center. Now, roll center in the front isn't very important, not as important in drag racing as it is in any type of event where the car is going to pitch side to side. So again, roll center is important for a drag car. If it gets out of shape, you want a good roll center so the car can be controlled, but it's not going to make or break the car, especially if you make it go straight all the time. So roll center, this is just showing one side, but roll center is basically the ball joint to frame mount on the upper, the ball joint frame mount on the lower, and the contact patch. And contact patch to where the upper and lower arms intersect. So this would be, looking at the front of the car, this would be the right wheel roll center. So here you've got a standard ride height, and you got it corrected. This is on a lowered car, and you can see, just like in my car, that lower control arm is going downhill, which then makes the intersecting point below ground. And that makes the car, it makes it like a breaker bar breaking a bolt loose. It makes the car roll around the front end and actually make leverage to unsettle the front end of the car. So on a corrected roll center, the CG will stay very close to each other, so now the car has no leverage. It's like using a stubby ratchet trying to break a bolt loose. You have no leverage. The body can't control the suspension. The suspension is controlling the car. Here you've got a long moment arm, which would be the same as a long breaker bar. It's very easy for the car to take over the suspension. So here now we see here's our instant center for our left. For our right. Here's our instant center for our left. And then that would be a roll center. I misspoke before. Really, that was an IC, not a roll center. But where your instant center bottom line from the tire contact patch to the instant center, where they intersect is actually the roll center of the car. So anytime you can keep this roll center closer to your CG of your front suspension, your suspension is going to be controlling the car, not the car controlling the suspension. Hope that makes sense. So, and the important thing for all that, which we're going to get into later on, is front versus rear roll angles. And when you have those not balanced, the car will push, or it will be loose in the middle of the turn. The rear end will outroll the front and it'll be loose, or the front will outroll the rear and the car will pick up a push. So those are the reasons that's what we're working our way to, is all the things that it takes to make the car as neutral as possible in the center of the turn, which is the slowest part, so that if we can make that part faster, the car will go, your lap times will drop. And it has nothing to do with horsepower. That's all. This is free power. So that's what we're trying to get at. So go to, I don't think there's no more picture there. So we go to, there's tons of different information on the internet. I happen to use performance trends programs for figuring out my roll center. There was Bob Bowles, who was an author and engineer, wrote a lot in Circle Track magazine. He has a software package. I cannot remember. It's been probably 10, 12 years since I used it, but his package was very good for figuring out your front to rear roll center and making adjustments to fix it. But the Circle Track Analyzer and Performance Trends also has just a front roll center program that you can get to. So let's go here to front suspension. And so let me go back to saved, maybe current. All right, so let me see if I can. Sorry for you guys that are on phones and stuff. This is hard, and I've tried a bunch today to try to figure out how to make this larger, but I was unsuccessful. But in this program, you can put in all your measurements. So what you do is you have your car on a fixture, or if it's already completed, you have it sitting on the tires, whatever you want. You figure out your center line, you mark your center line of the contact patch of each front tire, and then you find the center line of the car. Okay? Then you measure off the center line. So you measure from the center line to lower ball joint, lower control arm bushing, You want to know the distance and the height. That's what you see here. So lower frame pivot, 10 inches from center, and it was 5.43 inches high. And you can see that on this frame, they didn't have it centered because the passenger side was 9 3/4, and it was 5.65 high. And then you do your ball joint. So the ball joint was on the driver's side was 25.75, 6.5 inches high. On the passenger side, because the inner was moved, the ball joint was moved also, 26 inches and 6.5. See, the 6.5 is the same because it had the same diameter tire. So that stays the same. Now on a stock car, if you have stagger in the front end, obviously that's going to change. So with that being said, you do the same thing for your uppers. And then this program will give you, it'll figure out the IC. And you can see here is the IC of the left wheel. Here's the IC of the right wheel. Oh, wait a minute, I got dive in there. All right, so now this is at rest. So you can see where I had the car with the LG drop spindles, the roll center of the car was at ground level, or maybe it may have been, let's see, it was a ½ inch high and an inch and a third to the right. The roll center, or the IC of the left, was beyond the screen, same with the right. There's that. See, it's giving you the mark with an arrow saying it's way out there. But the cool thing with this program is we can see what the car, we can put the car into its paces. Now you can see right now the camber was in this, when I did this setup, I didn't do it after I made my alignment, but it was 3/4 negative on the right front and 0.9 negative on the left front. So now we can do a dive and roll. We can simulate the car diving on the brakes going into a turn. So we'll make it go, we're going to make it dive an inch, which when you're hard on the brakes, that's nothing. And we're going to give it a roll angle of, let's give it 1 degree. So now the car is pitched 1 degree and down, dived 1 degree, and now you see the roll center is now gone below ground level. The left front wheel IC is tightened up now because the suspension is more load on that side, so it's going in, and then obviously the right side is farther out. So I thought this also gave us camber gains on it too, but I don't see that. Oh yeah, here we go. So static camber actually was 1.2 negative on both sides. When the car went into the turn, the right front went to 2.5 degrees negative, and the left went to 1.57 negative. So if we got rid of the dive, so now you're freed up in the middle of the turn. Now you can see that the right went to just under 2 degrees negative camber, which I would say is probably a pretty good spot. And the left one is now at 0.5, so it lost 0.6 degrees of negative camber. So this is what I was talking about yesterday last week when we were talking about alignments, and why like a stock car that only turns left would run a positive number on the left front wheel, because you can see as the car rolls, it loses the camber that was in it. So you compensate for that. Again, that goes back to checking tire temps after you've been a couple laps around the track, and then figuring out where to move it to. The tire temps will tell you where you need to go with that. So this is a pretty cool program. If you're interested in just the roll center, this is basically what you're getting. With the circle track analyzer, you can do rear suspension, and then you can ask the program to tell you what's going to happen with front to back. So those are things you would get into farther down the road. But so if you want to, and with this, you can change your, say you want to put 3 degrees of roll into the car. You can put that in there, And actually, this is showing a right-hand turn, not a left-hand turn. I just realized that. So let's go positive 3 degrees. So now you can see the right front is down and the left side is up. That's what would happen on a left-hand turn. So let's see what that did to the camber and stuff. So see, this is why you would run a lot more camber than 1.2 on a stock car, because it is now positive 1 degree, and in this now it all makes a lot more sense. And your left side is now negative almost 4. So that's why you start out with a positive on the left, because as the car rolls to the right, because you're turning, the car always rolls the opposite direction you turn the wheels. You can see now that we would lose all the contact patch on that inside tire, because it's almost 4 degrees negative now, and the body's pulling it away. So you'd want to go positive. So that kind of I hope you can see where this is very helpful for analyzing what's going to happen before you go to the track. So at this point, you can make your changes and see what it's going to go. So I believe if we go back to neutral, and if I believe these numbers I can put in. So let's say we go negative 2.5. Negative 2.5, because we're going to be an autocross car. That would probably be a really good number to start with. All right, so now if we're going to get this come on, computer. Oh, not in roll. Okay. So now we can see what happens. We're again making a hard left-hand turn. The body has got 3 degrees of roll in it, and we can see that our negative 2.5 stayed negative, but it's only a half, and our inside tire stayed negative 2.5. Now it's almost 5. So that's showing that obviously this inside tire is going to be up, but now on an autocross or road course car, you have to give and take, because you're turning both directions. So if we change this to a negative 3, we would look at what a right-hand turn would do. Now you can see it swapped. So that's where you can kind of see where you want. You always want to be able to have a little bit of negative on the inside tire or the outside tire. Obviously, you have to give up some of that perfect suspension setup that a circle track car would have when doing this, but you can see that you can see where it would go. Now we're back to center. Now let me show you what would happen if we I should have a proposed, yeah. So here's what I was trying to achieve with the Chevy. You see that in this particular one, I moved the lower up, and I moved the upper down, which that shortened up my ICs much narrower, which raised my CG, or not my CG, my roll center. Unfortunately, on that car, the CG was still going to be way up here. It needed a lot of adjustment to make that work. But you can see this would have been a lot better off had I been able to get to that. So we can go to here, and you can, all you had to do is go in there and make your changes, and you can kind of see there's 2 spots up there, and that's because there was a before and after on the on that side. Okay, it's got roll. That's, there it goes. Okay, sorry about that. So that's because it had roll involved. So here's the new numbers, and what you'd have to do is you'd have to go down here to your frame pivot and on the upper and lower and look at the numbers, and that'll tell you where the changes were made to get the car to move the IC up. So again, on this type of car, on this type of suspension, if your upper and lower mounts are not adjustable, the only way you can adjust IC is by changing your spindle. You can add long travel ball joints. Long travel ball joint would move this G position, this A and G, up, which would make the top bars go down, which would raise the CG. So let's just do that. So if you put a say you gain a 1/2 inch with your with a extended ball joint. So we would change this number to 19.75, and this one same thing, 19.75, and that moved the IC from 3 to 3.9, so we gained 1 inch in roll center. Now you could move these down, and that would help even more. So your frame, upper frame pivot, let's go to let's see, B. Okay, so I don't know why that was like that. Okay, so let's move that down to 16. And this one is 16. And see, now we moved the IC up to 5 inch. So that's how you would, that's the best way to move the IC. You can leave your lower arms level. If you have room, you could put a longer ball joint out here, and that would make another dramatic change. So let's move the ball joint, and we'll go to 5.5. We're putting an inch extended ball joint. And now we moved the IC up to 6 inches. So now on a car that the IC is maybe, for all intents and purposes, you can use your camshaft height as a rough CG number. In a couple weeks, I'll show how to figure out the real CG of the car. But that's a quick, down and dirty way of doing it. Just measure your cam height, and that's usually pretty good. You know, with a cam in the center block. Obviously, overhead cam motor, that's not going to work. But basically, it's the center of the block. So obviously, the higher you can get that roll center height, the better the car's going to react. So let's put it in that same position again. Let's get rid of, go here, let's get rid of dive, because we're not going to be on the brakes. We're going to be center of turn, getting ready to accelerate. And let's give it 3 degrees of body roll. And you can see the roll center barely moved. And look at our camber. Our dynamic camber stayed very tight to where we were at. So this is showing you that we're now moving into the right direction, because now the body is rolling, the suspension is moving, but our camber gains are very minimal. We only lost 0.2 negative on the left front, and we only gained 0.6 basically on the right front. So now you're going to have a way better tire temp across the tire, and it's going to help with your alignment. That was one of the issues I had with my car that I showed you earlier. There was so much camber change that the tire temps I was reading for my camber adjustments were getting bad information because the roll center was so bad. The camber gains were heating the tire and not allowing you to see what was going on. See, Mike's in. Hey, Mike, glad you got here. Can you just start over? No, but you can watch the replay on the channel. Just go to the channel live shows, and you'll be able to watch the entire show over again. Appreciate you coming in. So I hope this is making sense to you why we want to check roll centers on front geometry. Again, drag cars, not so much importance, but you do want to make sure you have something good. You don't want to have garbage. You know, just like anything else, computers, data recording information, anything, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have a well thought out suspension, it's just going to make everything else a lot harder to control. And this is kind of what I went through with my car. It was good. The car handled okay. If you overdrove it, it would get a push. And unfortunately, not designing the front suspension myself, this program showed me it needed a lot of work. And I just didn't ever have enough time to invest in it to gain that. Now, being it had C5 upper mounts, the upper A-arm mount to the frame was a crossbar with bolts going through the frame. So that was an easy, I could adjust that. I could drop the upper arms down on the frame. I could drop them almost 2 inches. Was one of the things I was going to do. And another thing I was going to do was move the lowers up. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to get them up high enough. And I'll be honest, I never did enough research to see if I could get a longer ball joint. QA1, and there's other people out there that actually make, and you could have a machinist actually make it for you. They make a pressed in ball joint socket, but it actually has a spherical bearing in there, and then you can put a stud with just like the bump steer studs with spacers, and you can move the ball joint positioning wherever you want to move it. One of the issues with my car, with the Corvette suspension, because the ball joints are so far inside the tire to minimize scrub, that I could only move my lower A-arm probably a half of an inch and it would make contact with the wheel. So again, it got to the point where it needed a lot more effort than I was able to give it. So I lived with what I had. Driving the car up and down the highway, you would never know there's an issue. But trying to optimize the car for track use, you could see that there was issues with it. So let me give you guys a couple little sneak views of next week's show. So this show will also show rear suspension. So you can see this was truck arm, and then it has the Panhard bar, and the Panhard bar becomes your IC for the rear suspension. Hey, baby. Wife is home. So obviously now this on my car I had NASCAR truck arms, which had adjustable upper and lower mounts on the Panhard bar, so I could move the Panhard bar frame side and chassis side, suspension side up and down in 1/8 inch increments, so I could move that roll center. If your optimum rear suspension is a Watts link, so Watts link is tied to the frame on both sides with a W bar in the middle that's on a pivot. So wherever that pivot of that bar is, that becomes your IC. And the good thing about that is, as the suspension goes up and down, it keeps the IC in the center of the car, where a Panhard bar is swinging on an arc, so your IC does move a little bit. John says, my goal will be drag and drive, good launch and decent handling. Awesome. yeah, I'm gonna show you some stuff. I don't know if we're gonna do rear roll center. Oh, we'll probably get into it next week. So be sure to come back next week. We're gonna get into that. Ryan says, weird, you'll have better luck with the C4 front on the Vethart. They just work. Correct. That was one of the reasons why I chose the Vethawk project, because I wanted to use a car that had really good roll centers manufactured from the factory. You know, especially in a performance car, the manufacturers spend large sums of money with engineers that know way more than we know to design and lay out that stuff. And it showed when the C4 Corvette, during its duration, from 84 to 96, I believe, that car held the highest CG, not CG, what would that be? The highest G load in a circled pattern of any production car. So obviously they've already done their work. Now I'm still going to put the car into this program, because as you change ride height, you change those numbers. So I want to set the car up as close to OEM ride height. That's why I've lowered the body on the frame as much as I can. And then at that point, then I'll play with ride heights to see how we can optimize the roll centers. And obviously what we're trying to do is optimize or minimize the amount of camber gain when the car is in the middle of turns. So once again, on an autocross track, the better we can make the car, the faster we can make the car at the slowest part of the track, the faster the car is going to be for lap times. That's just the way it works. So that's going to be, that's what we're heading for that car. Now on the, let me go ahead and switch screens here. I look tired of that. There, now you can look at my ugly face. So I guess what we'll do is we'll go ahead, John. Next week we will go to drag racing rear suspension, and then the following week we'll follow up with front to rear roll center optimization for cornering. Yeah, right, Ryan. Then we'll have adjustments. If the CG gets crazy with that, I can always get a drop spindle. It just gives you options. At least if you start with something that's very good, it's just you can only make it better. And there's some tricks on the rear suspension. The way they had the 4-link mounted on that car, different model years had different heights. I think they had 2, maybe 3 different rear mounts there for the rear suspension. So that's going to affect how the car accelerates. So this is the biggest thing, I guess, that I wanted to explain, and hopefully you guys get what I'm trying to get at, is we start building a car, whether it's a 40 Ford or 55 Chevy or a 68 Camaro, and we buy upgraded suspension parts. I wanted to give you guys this information because now you can kind of understand what is going on and whether the suspension that you're putting on the vehicle is actually any better or not. So the reason I went with my 50, there's a ton of companies that make Mustang 2 front subframes for those cars, which are great for a road handling cruising car. But the problem is, to make that a good autocrosser, it's really not, that geometry is not correct either. So on the Corvette stuff, if you looked at the track width when I was showing those, if you saw that on the screen, the center line of the track width on my 50 was 57.5, where the Corvette would have been like 61 inches. So they narrowed everything to make it fit the car, but then that changes where your roll center is going to be. It makes the ICs go way out and creates all those issues. John says, awesome, appreciate all your information. No problem. I'm glad to give it out. And Ryan says, this is great information. Thanks, George. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks everybody for coming on the show tonight and listen to me babble on about suspension. Again, I am not an engineer, but I've got, I hate to say it, 40 plus years of doing this stuff, and you kind of become an engineer as you go along because, years ago, I admit, years ago when we were doing street rods and stuff, we'd go to the junkyard, get a Mustang 2 or a Pinto when you could find them in the junkyard, take spot weld drill bits and go out there and we'd undrill the whole front clip off of the unibody and take them home, clean them up, and set a 32 Ford frame in there, and we'd have our new suspension. And same kind of thing with drag cars. But as we progressed and tried to make our vehicles better, that's when we started doing, figuring out more of the stuff with roll centers and stuff like that. And a lot of times in the last couple of years, Mike says, I love chassis talk. Yay. A lot of times what I would do is I would take a big, you get these boxes with hoods in them or suspension or something. You get these big, huge cardboard boxes. And I would lay that on the ground and push it up against the front tires, and then I would make my template on that cardboard. And I could put all my center points on there of all my suspension points. And then, before I had an advent of the program, but I could take screws or stuff. You could go in a piece of plywood or whatever, and you could run screws and run string, and you could set all this stuff up. So once I understood what we were trying to look at, that's what I would do. I'd lay this all out on the ground, and the first couple ones we'd use a soapstone and a straight edge and just do it right on the ground and chalk it all out on the ground. And I thought, well, man, that's great because now somebody walks across it and your lines moved. So I advanced to the cardboard, and I then advanced to plywood so I could run screws in it. But basically that was so that we could then take string, move things on the board till it made sense, and then we would see what we could do to modify the frame. Obviously now we can, with computer programs, we can do it right on the computer program. Get all your measurements. That's the biggest thing. Take your time and make sure you get accurate measurements with the car at ride height, and then you can put it into the program, and then you can start playing with positions, and that'll tell you, whether you're going in the right direction or wrong direction. You can put the car into roll, you can put it into dive, you can put it into acceleration, and you can see what the front suspension is doing. So it just, to me, it makes a lot more sense to do that than to build the front end, go to the track, and then, hopefully you hit it spot on. But if not, then you have to go back and make some adjustments. This way, you can try to make those adjustments beforehand, especially if you're building your own suspension clip. Then you can figure this all out before you finalize anything, and at least start out in a great spot. Thanks, Chris. He says I'm an engineer in his book. I appreciate that. But anyway, so that's the whole thing of this, is so that we can make better decisions and make better projects and have more fun with our cars. Nothing. When I started with my Chevy, the 50, I really wasn't looking to make an autocross car, although I wanted to get back into some type of competition. Being I've raced everything from motorcycles, pro bikes to pro mods. I've even made a couple laps in some dragsters, and we did some go-karting. That wasn't really very professional, but we did it. And then I did circle track for a number of years. And the cool thing, why I really got heavy into this roll center stuff, is on the chassis that we were running, The guy that designed the suspension was really innovative. So we had, of course, now you're talking about a 1,200-pound car, so you could get away with a lot more. But like our anti-roll bar, our panhard bar, it had pinch clamps. So we had a half-inch rod end in the end of our panhard bar to a pinch clamp that they pinched on a 1-inch tube. So I put a 5-inch tube on the rear end housing, and we had a 12 or 13-inch tube in the chassis, and so we could move that panhard bar infinitely. We could put angle in it, we could put it level, we could move it up, we could move it down, whatever we want. And with the Bob Bowles program that I had, that was optimum for making the car neutral in the middle of the corners. The other cool thing that they did is the upper control arm on the car. So the lower control arm was mounted in the subframe. So basically he had it set up so it was level. The lower control arms were level, or maybe just a tick uphill. But the upper control arms were on pinch clamps also on the front of the A-arm. So we could drop those or raise those to get a real quick instant center. And then the rear portion, the rear bar, because it had spherical bearings for the upper A-arms, the rear bar went way back to the firewall. So those bars were almost perpendicular with the chassis, and your front lower control arm and upper control arm were more parallel or more at a 90 degrees. So that was the main thrust of your suspension points. And then the other cool thing they did was it had a 5/8 bolt that was 13 inches long and went through a 1/2-inch rod end or 5/8 rod end, and that was your ball joint. So you could put shims there and move the ball joints up and down, and really gave you an infinite amount of adjustment for that front suspension. And then we took the cars were basically made for dirt racing, but we raced asphalt here in Florida. So what I did is I took my drag racing experience. They would run a very short lower A-arm, a short trailing arm they ran 3 lengths, and they were very short because where the driver is sitting right in front of the differential. You think of a car, it's 72-inch wheelbase, and you got a motorcycle engine sitting sideways, and you're sitting, so you're almost right up against the rear end housing, and the rear end differential was pitched way to the right because the drive shaft would run alongside of your leg, run alongside the seat to the engine because the motorcycle engine was mounted sideways. I'll show you some pictures next week. And so they had a long top link in the car. And they did that because they were racing on dirt, and they wanted the car to get a lot of rear housing twist to plant the tires for the way they run a dirt car. I've never ran dirt, so I don't really know that to be the good way or whatever. I do know I've seen pictures of dirt late models, and they got the rear end, the tires like halfway up inside the inner fender because they're making the rear end turn so steep to make it go around the track. Again, making the fastest part of the slowest part of the track faster. But what we did on our cars is the top link, the bottom links were like 12 inches long, the top link was like 25 inches long. Well, we made our lower 3 link the same length, just like a drag car would be. So now there's very little rotation in the rear end housing. However, we still could move our link arms up and down to change our IC of the car for acceleration. The dirt guys didn't understand it. They said, oh, your suspension is going to react too slowly. But that's because they didn't think about the transfer of IC front to back, not on the side to side. So anyway, kind of getting off subject here. But we'll go down that road next week, and I'll show you guys, John was asking about weight transfer. Well, I'm going to show you how to make weight transfer. And it all depends on what tire you're running. Different tires and different track prep is going to create differences in what you want to do with the suspension. So we'll talk about that stuff next week. And again, all that is going to translate back to an asphalt circle track car or an asphalt autocross car, because we are still accelerating and deaccelerating the car, and we want to plant the tire to make traction. So this talk will will still concern everybody as far as forward acceleration. That's what basically we're going to be talking about next week. Mike says, hey, Mike, I see you're in. Can I message you tomorrow about roll bar tubing strength and different applications? Absolutely. You got my number. You know to get a hold of me. And anybody else that ever wants to get a hold of me and not during a live show, on the main page on the on YouTube, you can hit the about, and my contact information is there. So feel free. If you call and I don't answer, I may be working, but I will get back to you if you leave a message. If you don't leave a message, I probably won't call you back, because if I don't recognize the number, then I assume it's some type of trash, somebody wanting to sell my vehicle warranties expired and they want to sell me more, so I won't answer that. But if you do call me, just leave a message, then I will put you in my contact list so the next time your name comes up, and I will get to you as soon as I can. John says, better than an engineer, field experience trumps a lot. You're right. That's, school of hard knocks. That's how, how I've learned all this. And for you guys that may not have been coming to all these live shows, this is what this whole show is about, is me spewing my information that I've learned the hard way, so maybe you guys don't have to. And hopefully, who knows, 10, 15, 20 years from now, this may be a good reference for somebody, maybe even today. But anyway, I am my vehicle warranty. Yes, you are, Mike. I am also. But anyway, we're going to cut it off. We ran a little over 8 o'clock tonight. I appreciate everybody being on the feed. Appreciate everybody following along. Again, if something pops in your head, oh, I should have asked about that, put it in the comments. I check the comments all the time, and if you put a message in the comment, I'll answer it, and you'll get a notification from YouTube that I answered it. So you'll see that pretty quickly, or you can email me and then we go direct. But if you do it in the comments, then people will, other people will see that information also. As everybody else always says, I don't say it as much on my show. Like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell for instant notification. Thank you. Bill says, George is getting blinded tonight. George is great about calling back even you're in the middle of the event at Sick Week. Yeah, we had many conversations during Sick Week, didn't we? Chris says, should we be accelerating? It's the 40th. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And it's hard to believe we are 12 weeks from a full year of doing the live show. So I appreciate it. I'm waiting to actually get my check in hand, but the channel became monetized in November, and as of Wednesday, I've surpassed the $100 point, which is where the minimum, they won't write you a check unless you hit $100. So I should be sometime soon getting a check from YouTube for $100. Yeehaw! Maybe we'll buy another camera lens or something. But anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. Next week will be rear suspension. Think of questions if you have some, and we'll get after it. And have a great week, and I'll see you guys in next week. So, peace.